Good morning and welcome to everyone. Welcome speaker and participant. And thank you for this conference. This conference is jointly organized by left parties in Southeast Asia and Australia. The Party Socialist Malaysia or PSM, Socialist Workers Thailand, Partido Lakas ng Masa or PLM in Philippines, Socialist Alliance Australia, Partai Rakyat Pekerja Indonesia, and Kesatuan Perjuangan Rakyat or KPR in Indonesia. I am Abu Mufahir from Sedane Labor Resource Center Indonesia, and I will be the moderator for this session. Before we start, to briefly go through some housekeeping rules. First, housekeeping rule is all participants are requested to respect difference in view and opinion. Second, please pose question in a short and specific manner to the respective panel for their views. Third, Q&A is not for debate, but for asking question only. Four, we will not tolerate any derogatory remarks, sexist or vulgar posting in the chat, and the organizer have a right to such participant if they are found to do so. We have simultaneous translation in Chinese, Malay, Bahasa, Indonesia, and Thai. For this translation, you will see in the bottom right corner of the screen on the translation button. And please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. For participants, if you would prefer to write a question or comment, please use the chat box, which you can use throughout the session. Okay, the topic of our session today is imperialist geopolitics and the role of China today. As we know, in the last few years, there are rising competition between two major imperialist forces, United States and China. US political maneuver in global affair to boost US imperialism, weakening hegemony. A key feature is rising competition and aggression against China. In the past few years, China is expanding both economically and militarily. In the same time, China has made dramatic foreign policy decisions that have changed both the global landscape and the behavior of other states. This session will discuss about this current geopolitical situation. We are privileged to have three competent speakers to discuss about this topic. I will now introduce our speaker. The first speaker is Comrade Rastio Deliso. Comrade Rasti is an international affairs analyst and longtime socialist activist. He is the former alliance coordinator and spokesperson of the Progressive Democratic Coalition, or called San Lakas. He is also former political affairs coordinator of the Socialist Political Party, Partido Lakas ng Masa, or Party of the Laboring Masses, or PLM. Former national coordinator of the Socialist Political Center, Labang ng Masa, or Fight of the Masses, and former head of General Secretariat of the Broad Anti-War Coalition, Campaign for Peace with Social Justice. Rusty is a co-founder of the Stop War Coalition, presently a vice president of the Revolutionary Socialist Political Center of the Philippine Working Class Movement, Bukluran ng Manggagawang Filipino, or Solidarity Workers, or BMP. The second speaker with us today is Chun Kai. Comrade Chun Kai is graduated from University of Science, Malaysia, with a degree in chemical science. He was involved in a student activism campus day and was suspended for a semester by USM for protesting against the Internal Security Act, or ISA. I previously worked with human rights organization Swaram as Penang coordinator in 2002 to 2007. He was also detained under the emergency ordinance in 2011. He is currently the coordinator of International Bureau of PSM and is the editor of forsocialist.net. And the third speaker with us is Comrade Muhammad Rido. Comrade Rido studied political science at the University of Indonesia has a master's degree in the development studies from Murdoch and is currently reading political science for both his master and PhD in Northwestern University, Illinois, where he is writing on comparative politics, the political economy of democratization, social movements, state theory, and political theory. He is recipient of both the ISRSV Ariman Scholar Award and the ISRSV Ariman Fellow Award, and has published work on oligarchy, class state, and forced eviction. We will have 20 minutes for presentation of each speaker, and please speak slower so our interpreter can do the interpretation better. So, comrade, let us now, comrade Rastio Delizo. Comrade, the space is yours. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello to all the comrades. Good morning and good afternoon. I hope that all of you can hear me. Can anybody hear me at this point?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Okay, so I shall now proceed. Okay. The topic that I shall be presenting is based on a paper that I wrote particularly for this session 7. And I'd like to know if you can at least see it on the screen for now.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let me check on the share screen. Okay, how about that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I shall read to you the paper I wrote particularly for this Socialism 2021 conference. And my paper will basically focus on the nature and scope of US imperialism today, post-Trump, and specifically under the President Joe Biden regime. And this paper of mine, which is entitled Imperialist Rebalance, America's KGB Foreign Policy Line Fortifies US Imperialism's Global Hegemony. And this paper essentially has 6 parts. The first would be the introductory part, followed by America's KGB Foreign Policy Line. The third part is entitled The General Framework and Application of the KGB Line. Fourth is the KGB Line's Course versus China. The fifth is the KGB Line's Prospective Global Impact. And the sixth and last part is Our Socialist Tasks Forward Amid the US Imperialist Offensive. So I shall start reading it. I hope that the interpreters and translators can follow me at this point. I'll try to speak as slow as I can. Okay, today's imperialist world system reflects a combined set of diverse crises affecting the global order's systemic contradictions. These inherently include the generalized crises of the international capitalist economy, the deadly and unabated COVID-19 pandemic, rising regional and trans-regional political security tensions driven by inter-imperialist competitions, and the catastrophic climate change emergency endangering humankind and its, one moment, I'll just have to, how do I get rid of this? One moment, comrades. I'm having a blocked screen here.
kasi. Ayan o.
Okay, sorry for that, comrades. I'm not a techie type, so my comrade wife helped me out. May I quickly read through this again, the first part. So today's imperialist world system reflects a combined set of diverse crises sharpening the global order's systemic contradictions. These inherently include the generalized and deepening crisis of the international capitalist economy, the deadly and unabating COVID-19 pandemic, rising regional and trans-regional political security tensions driven by inter-imperialist competitions, and the catastrophic climate change emergency endangering humankind and its ecosystems. The consequence of this historical conjuncture of worldwide ruptures already poses a direct threat to the future of our universal humanity. Hence, the international working class movement, led by progressive left and revolutionary socialist forces, is now urgently tasked to overcome the multiple crises of capitalism by resolutely advancing the general struggle for world socialism. This global setting imparts the context for this paper. The primary purpose shall be to try to further analyze American imperialism's contemporary reactions to rebalance and revitalize itself amid a highly destabilized and still deteriorating international environment. The intent of this paper is to outline the emergent foreign policy principles, concepts, and agenda which the United States is already beginning to pursue under the reactionary leadership of President Joe Biden's regime. This is because Washington's new global strategic outlook principally defines and shapes America's current external aims and objectives. Therefore, my paper essentially highlights and underscores the newly revived aspects of US foreign policy's material motives, fundamental scope and framework, and overall direction ahead. Definitely, any additional understanding of US imperialism's present course of action to fortify its global hegemony can positively help to inform and guide the international revolutionary proletarian movement in developing highly effective can positively help to inform and guide the international revolutionary proletarian movement in developing highly effective forms of popular mass resistance battles to greatly damage and break the weakest links of the world imperialist chain at the level of national arenas of working class struggles. On the road to winning the historical mission of the proletariat, which is world socialist revolution, it becomes imperative to develop a further critical awareness of the rising reactionary and militarist thrusts of American imperialism. This is because the latter's key external policy designs and schemes are not only aimed at neutralizing its major great power competitors at the present time, both the People's Republic of China, PRC, and the Russian Federation, but more so, US imperialism's ultimate target in the longer term is the world's masses of working people, specifically the organized forces of the international working class movement, in order to protect and preserve the bourgeois world system. This is crucially important to be grasped by the socialist forces as Washington perpetually seeks to fully safeguard its enduring superpower status and global strategic interests at all costs. Toward this end, the United States is clearly bolstering its external relations posture on the world stage. US imperialism's central goal is directed at a global rebalance to revitalize its dominant influence and control across key domains of the international milieu: economic, political, diplomatic, security, health, climate, technological, cyberspace, and cultural. In enhancing this foreign relations approach, the US is equally renewing its geostrategy to secure a dominating edge in global affairs for itself. Undeniably, this foreign policy track is centered on reasserting America's predominance over a world environment largely characterized by a capitalist disequilibrium. And so, as the world situation jeopardizes American imperialism's future balance, Washington is by now maneuvering to ramp up its global strategic agenda via a revitalized foreign policy line with a renewed geostrategic approach, America's KGB Foreign Policy line. To enhance its imperialist rebalance, the United States is drawn from its own diplomatic and national security past in order to recharge for its future foreign policy drives. In fact, the Biden regime recently launched a newly designed foreign policy line and framework whose scope goes far beyond the parameters of its previous 2-decade-long global war of terror crusade post 9/11. Over the coming years, Washington's renovated foreign policy stance will chiefly be geared toward a maximized recovery and accumulation of super profits for the American capitalist ruling class, while enhancing its intrinsic national powers. All the same, this unfolding process marks a glaring shift in the latest doctrinal development of US foreign policy. Indeed, this ideologically driven external relations perspective will force US foreign policy planners to incessantly push for the expansion of a global redivision of labor. For America's foreign policy community, the urgent need to stabilize global market dynamics for the assured economic growth of American capitalism can be advanced either through the world's existing neoliberal model of capitalist exploitation or via neo-Keynesian lines propagating state-based planning, regulatory, and investment policies. But regardless of its options for any capitalist development onward, US imperialist foreign policy will always stand for the guaranteed protection of the core interests of America's monopoly bourgeoisie and for the permanence of its rule over the capitalist world system. Thus, America's present-day foreign policy direction is guided by a rejuvenated set of external relations precepts previously advocated by 3 Cold War-era US national security advisors who all epitomize American imperialism's geostrategic thinking. Accordingly, their earlier ideas and thoughts continue to prefer the US foreign policy national security apparatus with the following conceptions to help Washington break out from its dilemma. A, to effectively protect and advance America's core strategic interests by maintaining a balance of power in international relations through the dominant role of US-led alliances. B, to actively pursue political warfare via gray zone tactics to manipulate and sway global public opinion in support of US foreign policy goals and aims. And C, to dominate the Eurasian landmass with a comprehensively integrated strategy to decisively influence and control the Eastern Hemisphere, the largest hemisphere on Earth terrain-wise for America's global primacy. These key dictums characterizing American imperialism since the start of the Cold War correspondingly reflect a troika of mindsets of some of America's foremost national security and foreign policy elites, namely Henry Kissinger, Gordon Gray, and Zbigniew Brzezinski. As former national security advisors and once at the top echelon of the US foreign policy community, they were principally involved in designing, crafting, and executing America's belligerent schemes in the latter half of the last century, chiefly against the former Soviet Union. And now, in the 3rd decade of the 21st century, a synergized external relations approach, employing the major strategic concepts exemplifying the Kissinger, Gray, Brzezinski principles and thrusts, is America's new KGB foreign policy line. To understand Washington's current world outlook and strategies under Biden, America's KGB foreign policy doctrine and its subsequent course of action needs to be comprehended. This is very significant as the KGB line is now aimed to thwart and overcome wide-ranging threats to the US's external strategic environment altered by the post-pandemic global disorder. And with this anticipated scenario, we should expect the international order to drastically shift once again and become reordered under more volatile circumstances. Firstly, Kissinger's realist international relations standpoint views the world order operating in an anarchistic manner. To prevail, the US must guarantee its underlying national interests by permanently maintaining a global balance of power to America's advantage. As such, Washington has has to constantly build and secure for itself an array of major yet conditionally flexible international alliances under Washington's decisive and perpetual leadership. Through this global design, the US ensures its comprehensive control over the international order and community. It shall do so by continuously intervening in world affairs, economically, politically, diplomatically, culturally, technologically, and militarily. Simultaneously, American imperialism will relentlessly strive for domination over a substantial majority of the Earth's space, populace, and natural resources, specifically through its hegemonic spheres of influence and dominance. Consequently, the worldwide architecture of interlocking webs of US-led capitalist alliances will play a central role in reshaping the general parameters and facets of the global arena for the ultimate protection of America's core strategic interests. Secondly, a focal tenet of Gray's is anchored upon the prime employment of a psychological strategy to purposefully manage overall US foreign policy. Accordingly, political warfare will fully be planned for, developed, coordinated, and operationalized within America's broad external relations framework. This is to be pursued primarily through an integrated range of gray zone tactical measures based on disinformation campaigns, economic pressures, political manipulation, and often in selective combination with covert direct actions, but at a threshold level just below all-out military conflict. Precisely, Washington shall readily apply these externally directed political warfare schemes to coerce and persuade its foreign allies and neutral states to continuously bow to America's global priorities at any opportunity. And third, a pivotal council of Brzezinski's is already an ascendant urgency among senior US foreign policy planners. According to the NSA's leading precepts, America must always drive forward a geostrategy that projects its inherent strengths and powers globally. This is to vitally preserve the customary stability of the capitalist international order in alignment with core US principles and interests. And to successfully secure its worldwide predominance, the US should strategically influence and control the immense trans-regional Eurasian zone, the same terrestrial realm which geographically encompasses both China and Russia. Moreover, because Brzezinski's geostrategic guidance presupposes the need to pursue and enhance this area-focused external relations track, a key task here is to expand and deepen US-led alliances all across the Eastern Hemisphere in support of Washington's shifting foreign affairs objectives and conforming narratives. From a geopolitical perspective, this critically explains Washington's intensifying rivalry targeting the alliance forged between Beijing and Moscow. Indeed, the China-Russia strategic partnership concretely reflects a common defense of their Eastern Hemisphere-based interests from America's dangerously threatening probes and malign intentions within the area. And certainly, the unified objective of the Sino-Russo duo is to directly counter and neutralize US imperialism's intensifying bellicose strategy. Undeniably, US imperialism's cardinal nature will continuously push it to advance the KGB paradigm as a reaction to the global order's continually fluctuating strategic environment. Accordingly, American foreign policy will necessarily be compelled to accelerate its assaults across the world. In a sweeping manner, this means building more robust trans-regional economic and defense-based alliances to broaden and boost its spheres of influence, instigating political warfare campaigns and initiatives to keep the global community aligned behind Washington's leadership, and spearheading assertive and aggressive actions throughout the Eurasian heartland and the vast Asia-Indo-Pacific land maritime corridors to rule over the Eastern Hemisphere. The general framework and application of the KGB line. From its viewpoint in the White House, the imperialist Biden regime's basic outlook essentially sees two sources of clear threats to the prospective stability of the United States. Internally, Washington is directly troubled by America's lingering economic difficulties, like inflationary surges, weak industrial output, pandemic-induced unsustainable employment, excessive public debt levels, etc., fused with growing political instability, like a fragile social cohesion, increasing inequality, widening racism, disunity within the US Congress, among others. And externally, the US is greatly alarmed by China's bolstered and competing economic, diplomatic, military power stabs throughout the world. Linked to this, America is also seriously disturbed and threatened by the consolidated strategic partnership between China and Russia concerning vital areas of the Eastern Hemisphere, especially across the vast Eurasian landmass and its surrounding frontier zone. Without a doubt, American imperialism steadily locked its diplomatic target sites on China for over the past decade, even before Biden entered the White House. Yet, by February 2021, the US deliberately and officially declared and classified the People's Republic of China as its, quote, long-range strategic competitor, unquote. Further, America blatantly stated that China has the, quote, aspiration to challenge the United States globally, unquote, particularly in the realm of world affairs. And with this stark foreign policy stance, the Biden regime formally fashioned Beijing into its newest and latest global enemy since World War II. In view of clear and present dangers to America's inclusive security and well-being, US imperialism is constrained to immediately counteract and surmount its perceived domestic and foreign threats by addressing and connecting both national matters of concern through an overarching policy framework with a conscious global strategic outlook. Thus, American imperialism's new global policy agenda emanates from the principal doctrines of its KGB line. Fundamentally, this foreign policy framework comprises three main elements, namely A, global strategic infrastructure, B, global strategic approach, and C, global strategic concentration. And for this line to have its desired effect, all three elements will have to be brought to bear synchronously by Washington. The KGB line's global strategic infrastructure is to be concretely built upon a worldwide network of existing international, regional, and multilateral alliances, some of which have been in place since the Cold War period. This architecture of alliances, mainly along economic and security tracks, will be expanded on region-wide dimensions, while additional area-based pacts are to be formed under America's imperialist leadership, control, and guidance. In truth, Biden himself publicly promised to create more US-led transnational and transregional formations involving its traditional allies and other friendly countries. His goal is to augment a, quote, rules-based international order, unquote, on a global scale. In other words, solidifying the international order along bourgeois democratic values, norms, and standards. In application, US imperialism will operate to maximize its innate strengths and potencies through its hegemony over key regional alliances and multilateral groupings for its own ends. This would basically include, among others, the European Union, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Group of 7, Group of 20, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the ASEAN, East Asia Summit, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the Middle East Strategic Alliance, Five Eyes Alliance, Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad, the Australia, United Kingdom, United States AUKUS Collective Security Pact, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. Although Washington does not have a total and absolute control of these international formations, it maintains a prevailing authority over and within them. And of course, Washington will never flinch at manipulating them for its own imperialist machinations. For example, to accelerate its KGB line, Washington seeks to compel more regional states to join the US-led Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, a collective security alliance comprising Japan, Australia, and India, to directly confront the Sino-Russo alliance across the Asia-Indo-Pacific. And over the past months, America's aggressively escalating anti-China crusade has already conclusively pressured the Philippines to reaffirm the 1998 RP, Republic of the Philippines, US Visiting Forces Agreement, VFA. Thus, Manila has only rechained itself to Washington's global war machine. Coupled with this is the element of the global strategic approach. This aspect of the KGB foreign policy framework is all about implementing and carrying out psychological strategy, political warfare, especially gray zone tactics at the international level, to greatly amplify and boost the key global aims and interests of America. The essential features of this component are fundamentally in the form of tactical measures and activities to impress upon America's external publics a particular policy-based narrative. The principal objective is to cause a shift in the attitudes and orientations of global society so as to generate broader support for specific and/or general US foreign policy assertions and ventures.
Comrade Rusty, sorry,
Yeah,
you have
yes.
2 minutes left, okay? Sorry,
Okay,
you have
all
2
right.
minutes left, yes, thank you.
I'll stop me, Comrade Abu, once it's after 2 minutes. I'll just continue to read this. Thank you. Attaining this would necessarily embody a broad spectrum of calculated and preemptive schemes and ploys targeting identified foreign entities, both state and non-state actors. Such tactics will be unleashed in order to force the latter to inevitably bend to America's global agenda and wishes. In clear operational terms, this takes various forms, including ambushes, assassinations, blockades, bombings, coups d'etat, cyber attacks, deception, disinformation, economic corruption, foreign electoral interventions, invasions, low-intensity conflict, militarist aggression, sabotage, sanctions, tarnishing of selected political leaders and personalities, and many more anti-democratic methods. Though oftentimes a blend of these tactical options are simultaneously employed versus America's external targets. Henceforth, the US is expected to heighten the execution of its political warfare actions to rebalance itself globally in the years and decades ahead. In fact, the international community continues to witness America's wide range of unending aggressiveness towards states with self-declared anti-US imperialist attitudes and postures. Undoubtedly, these targeted states include China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, and still many other countries. The KGB foreign policy framework's third element is that of global strategic concentration. This involves the pursuit of a comprehensively unified range of planned activities and undertakings to attain American objectives concentrated on the Eurasian zone, the heartland of the Eastern Hemisphere. Presently, the determined focus of US foreign policy directed at Eurasia underpins and molds America's foremost geostrategy for obvious strategic reasons.
Congrats. Yes, it's time for you to wrap up.
Okay. Well, I can end here. Anyway, the Secretariat has my paper. It's I hope it could be published elsewhere. You can read it. Basically, I just wanted to analyze further to contribute to the international communist movement, socialist movement worldwide, my own analysis and views on how US imperialism is further deepening its so-called rebalance, which is actually an onslaught against the international working class movement and socialist forces worldwide. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much, comrades. You can hopefully ask the Secretariat for a copy of my paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. We will share your full paper with all the participants here. And thank you for very comprehensive, interesting presentation. I think from the comrade Rusty, we have learned about the nature and the purpose and the historic stage of the US imperialism from the World War era, Cold War era, and current situation, and how US control and domination on the world orders. Comrade Rusty also discussed how US see China growing power as clear and present danger to the American nation. And I think one of the most important points that discussed is by understanding the US imperialism, it can help the working class movement to find the weakest link of the imperialists in both national and global level to make our resistance become more effective. Thank you again, Comrade Rusty. And now it's time for the second speaker, Comrade Chonkai. Please, space is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Moderator. Okay, just a disclaimer before I start my sharing. Okay, I am not an expert in geopolitics. So what I present here is only some of my shallow thoughts on this topic. Okay, a new Cold War actually is unfolding with the increase of military build-up and warmongering rhetoric towards a military confrontation between US-led Western powers with China. The US and its allies have framed China as the major threat, creating hysteria and fears towards China and getting more provocative to start a war with China. But the situation today actually is far more different from the Cold War in the 20th century. Some people might view the intensifying US-China rivalry as the result of the clash between two different ideologies or distinctively different economic systems. But the fact is very much about the increasing competition between Chinese capital and the US capital at world level, as China has emerged as the second largest economy, soon to be the largest, maybe within the decade, in the framework of global capitalism, and posing challenges to the dominant hegemony of US imperialism. The rise of China in the last 3 decades with rapid industrialized economic growth and increasing geopolitical influence is coupled with the deindustrialization in the US and the perceived declining of US hegemony globally. This has caused the anxiety or even panic among some sections of the US ruling elites that entail them to react in a fear-mongering manner and promote the so-called new Cold War. So today, China's US-China rivalry may remind us of something in the last century. Remind us of the British-German inter-imperialist rivalry in the early 20th century, which led to the 2 world wars. The US and its allies today, through military alliances or security pact like the Indo-Pacific Quad or the recently launched AUKUS, okay, all the weird name, to counter the perceived China threat, has much similarities with the Triple Entente during the turn to the 20th century, which formed by the imperialist Britain together with France and Russia to counter the threat of the rise of German imperialism since the late 19th century then. But of course, we cannot simply characterize China today as an imperialist power like the European imperialist power in the past, or like Germany in late 19th century, which they are late 19th century to early 20th century, which they expand through colonization, direct colonization. Okay? China's economic expansion is largely peaceful without military aggression. Maybe it makes it much more milder version of German imperialism at the turn of 20th century. But with China embracing the model of capital accumulation under its mantra of socialism with Chinese characteristic and its rapid growing economy, it poses tendency towards developing a new hegemonic power or new form of imperialist influence if the grave power wielded by China is unchecked. All right, in the age of information warfare, or maybe misinformation or disinformation, in the age of social media, we have been overwhelmed by a lot of information which is biased towards certain political agenda and tendencies in relation to China, either is anti-China or pro-China. It made the discussion on these topics become divisive, even among the left. Okay, relationship and interaction of China with its neighbors, as well as superpowers in the world is complex. We cannot view it as a dichotomy of good versus evil or socialism versus capitalism. This is not that simple. Relationship between China and the US is complicated and complex. They are not always hostile as well as not always friendly to each other. China and US are always interconnected in many ways throughout their modern history. For the imperialist US, it is always about securing the interests of US capital and its dominance at the world's level. And for China, the bottom line is always about the survival of the People's Republic since the early days of the foundation and the preservation of the Communist Party rule. Before I touch, maybe before we go into more about this discussion, I just want to remind comrades and friends here about the anti-imperialist origin of Chinese Revolution. Okay. The People's Republic of China was born out of a heroic and long struggle of Chinese people against imperialism and for national liberation. In the early days of the People's Republic of China, the state of the People's Republic and the Communist Party of China play a role in supporting national liberation struggles in a number of countries in Asia and Africa, like Korea, Vietnam, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and Mozambique. Okay. Although China and Soviet Union enjoy a close relationship in the early days of the foundation, it was fragile and deteriorated with the Sino-Soviet split that began in the 1950s. The Sino-Soviet split somehow demonstrated the characteristic of China's foreign policies, at least during Mao era, some kind of a rebel against the big brother, seeking independence and self-reliance in pursuing its own path of development. China also played a role in the formation of a third bloc or a non-aligned bloc of the newly independent countries, politically independent from the influence of the two major blocs or superpowers during the Cold War of 20th century, through efforts like supporting the Bandung Conference in 1955. And the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which include mutual respect of each other, territorial integrity and sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexisting. These principles was meant to be the backbone of China's foreign policies, or at least it was reiterated from time to time from Mao's era until now. These principles was first proposed by Zhou Enlai in December 1953, and soon after that it was codified in the Sino-Indian Agreement 1954, as well as the Sino-Burmese Treaty of Friendship and Non-Aggression in the same year. But the spirit of 5 principles of peaceful coexistence was challenged and eroded not long after its formulation, with the outbreak of Sino-Indian Border War in 1962, during the culmination of Sino-Soviet split. So there was this shift of China's somehow the China's foreign policy. The Sino-American rapprochement in 1972 marked a geopolitical realignment, with China drawing closer to US to contain the influence of Soviet Union. This is detrimental to the national liberation and socialist movements in many parts of the world. For example, the active role of China played in supporting Pakistan, which was a US close ally during the 1971 genocide in Bangladesh. The support for UNITA alongside with apartheid South Africa and the US against the MPLA that's supported by Soviet Union and Cuba during the Angolan Civil War in the 1970s. China even launched a military invasion on Vietnam. Okay, China supported the Vietnam during the Vietnam War against US, but in 1979, China even launched a military invasion, claiming to teach Vietnam a lesson when the Vietnamese communists overthrown the murderous Khmer Rouge regime, which was backed by both US and China in Cambodia. Okay, the invasion was aiding the effort of the US to isolate Vietnam in the Southeast Asia, as well as to contain the Soviet influence. So this is some complex relationship of China with US. And China's integration into global capitalism began when the Communist Party of China introduced reform and opening up in the late 1970s, and accelerated the process since Deng Xiaoping's Southern Tour in 1992. The accession of China into the World Trade Organization is the culmination of China's integration into the global capitalist economic system. The rapid industrialization, urbanization, and economic growth of China in the last 30-40 years is the result of China's pivot to capitalism through a symbiotic relation with US capitalism. China has become the epicenter of capital accumulation. Although the Communist Party and the states are still in control of the important sectors of the economy, the characteristics of the economic model is definitely a capitalist one, as long as the driving force of economic activities is predominantly for capital accumulation. So China now is now the inseparable part of global capitalism. Okay, something seems more real than its claim that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China. Okay, I will go to Taiwan later. Okay, China has played a role in saving global capitalism during the 2008 economic crisis. And China's economic success in within the global capitalism has made China on the course of taking over the dominant position of US as the world superpower. Okay, this of course made the US freaks up and start to intensify its effort to contain China. Okay, so this is some of the graphs that show the growth of Chinese economy. But on the chart on the left bottom, actually it shows even the GDP of China grow explosion, but in terms of the GDP per capita, actually is still far behind compared to its neighboring developed industries like South Korea and Taiwan. And these are the companies, Chinese companies in the Fortune Global 500, already overtaken US. But of course, majority of these companies are state-owned companies. Okay, as an emerging superpower, China is confronted with foreign threat of containing her rise, as well as deep societal contradictions domestically. This led to the Chinese state-backed fueling of nationalist sentiment among the populace of China. The Chinese dream for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, as proposed by Xi Jinping, is meant to create such sentiment. Okay, actually this is a poster of the 2017 film, Wolf Warrior 2, okay, and together with his first film in 2015. Okay, the title of this film, Wolf Warrior, now actually the term Wolf Warrior also being used as to describe the aggressive style of diplomacy under Xi Jinping administration in the recent years. Okay, the so-called major power diplomacy with Chinese characteristics. And this kind of the so-called Wolf Warrior mentality, or the rising of nationalism, actually also shown in the strength of China's influence, not economically as well as also politically, especially the film. Okay, it's a fictional film, but it's so-called based on a real event, based on the 2011 evacuation of Chinese citizens from Libya, which 30,000 of Chinese citizens was evacuated during the civil war in Libya, and the China sending its military ships and airplane there. So it's give a rise of this kind of Chinese nationalist sentiments. Okay, so together with the economic power, the military power of China is also growing. This raised concern, of course, and it's expectedly from the US, whose hegemonic power has been threatened, but also among her neighboring countries. Okay, Chinese military expenditure has been growing steadily in the last 2 decades, as China has the aim to build a strong, modernized military force. Nevertheless, the military expenditure of China is still only about 1/3 of the US military expenditure, according to the 2019 figures. The US military expenditure accounted for 3.7% of its GDP, whereas China only 1.7% of GDP. So this is still a relative big gap between China and US in terms of military strength. Okay, let alone the foreign military bases where US has about 700 to 800 military bases in at least 70 countries worldwide, with significant numbers of them surrounding China, whereas China has only one in Djibouti, located in the Horn of Africa at the moment, where US and its allies like Japan, France also has military present there. So the question is, who is the bigger threat? Who is threatening who? Is China building any military base near the coast of US, like what US did to China? And what would be the US reaction if China does so? Okay, the balance of power between China and US still asymmetrical, okay, at least for me, from my observation. Although the brewing of the new Cold War and build up for military confrontation with China and US still closely related, but with China and US still closely related economically, it is quite illogical actually for China and US to go on a full-scale war. The reason is simple. Any war between these two superpowers will end up with catastrophe and devastation, not only to the lives of countless people and ecology, but of course, this is not the concern of US imperialism, but it also will damage the global capitalist economy, which US and China benefited from it. For the US, probably it is the superpower that has the most possibility to make such illogical moves for its hysteria to contain a perceived threat to its hegemonic power. For China, it will be largely defensive, and any leader of China with rational thinking will not risk its well-preserved political stability in the country and economic development for going on a devastating war with the world's biggest superpower. China, at least in her official position, is not seeking global domination to become a global dominant superpower or to replace the US as the world #1 superpower anytime in near future. But with the increasing military build-up that aim to contain China, the tension is rising and the risk of war, whether it's accidentally or intentionally, is becoming more and more likely. So what are the fresh points? I want to just give two examples. I think this one, Warden Bello has touched on in his speech, so I won't go much in this on South China Sea. Okay, this is one of the fresh points that can spark a war. China claimed the ownership of 90% of the South China Sea for its own national strategic interests, with the so-called 9-dash line. Actually, it's in conflict with the national interests of the neighboring countries, including Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and even Indonesia. Okay, but at the same time, the U.S. military presence in the South China Sea, which is not about protecting the right to navigation, as he claimed, but the presence is only to defend the military supremacy of U.S. imperialism over the Asia-Pacific region. Okay, so this is provoking more tension to the conflicts. Okay, another fresh one is Taiwan. Okay, I just maybe need to take some more time on this. Okay, Beijing official position now is China would prefer to achieve the reunification with Taiwan peacefully, but never abandon the means to use military force to reunite with Taiwan. The central government of China in Beijing claims Taiwan as the inseparable part of China. Okay, as reiterate in its reason, including many of its documents, including the recent historical resolution, the Communist Party of China sees solving the Taiwan question to realize the complete reunification of China as the unswerving historical task of the party and the inevitable requirement for the realizing of the great rejuvenation of Chinese nation. Okay, so this is where the problem lies. It is quite clear that the reunification dream of China carried by the Communist Party of China is a nationalist agenda, nothing to do with socialism. Taiwan question is the product of the 20th century Cold War. But the situation surrounding this question has changed very much in the last 7 decades. Taiwan today is not Taiwan under the Kuomintang dictatorship 70 years ago. And the Taiwanese people have struggled and charted their own course during the period of against the Kuomintang dictatorship and for the democratization. Although Taiwan Republic of China government is the US close ally, the US has taken a position of strategic ambiguity with Taiwan on Taiwan question since the Sino-American rapprochement. The US will be using the excuse to defend Taiwan from Chinese invasion to attack China militarily with the intention to force China into submission to the interests of US imperialism. Looking at the recent development and the past history of US involvement in war around the world, Washington may resort to a preemptive attack on China in the name of defending Taiwan. Of course, unfortunately for the US, although there's still a gap in terms of military might, China is definitely not Iraq or Afghanistan. Okay? And we can predict how the US military will fare if it goes on war with China, regardless the outcome. Although the US is the larger threat to the war to break out in Taiwan Strait, China has a share in escalating the tension with military threats from time to time on Taiwan. Okay? This is China also has a role there. So for the international level, we should oppose war in Taiwan Strait. It is because the war will not only devastating for the Taiwan and its nearby Chinese provinces, it could bring catastrophe to the peoples in the Asia-Pacific region or even the world because of the war between these two superpowers. We must stop the US from launching any preemptive military strike on China. We must oppose US provocation of war on China. But at the same time, we should also be critical and call out China on its unruly behavior with the intention to threaten Taiwan into submission with military invasion. If China invades Taiwan, it is not a liberation war anymore, but in fact, it's only a demonstration of a nationalist, chauvinist characteristic of the Communist Party of China through military aggression, annexation, and occupation, or even colonization that denied the right to democratic self-determination of Taiwanese people. Invading Taiwan or not is the litmus test on whether China is what Lenin said, socialist in words and imperialist in deed. So the escalation of US-China geopolitical conflict will have an impact on the left and social movement around this region or even the world. Okay, I focus on the Southeast Asia region. So the geopolitical tension unleashed by inter-superpower rivalry could worsen political polarization in countries trapped in between these two big powers, okay, trapped in the geopolitical crashes. Right-wing forces in respective countries will certainly make use of the escalation of geopolitical tension to fuel narrow nationalist sentiment and instill xenophobia for their own political agenda for power and to weaken the progressive forces. Bourgeois governments or ruling class elites will certainly be happy to use such geopolitical tension to divert attention of the masses from the real issue. Okay? The class conflict in their own country can be diverted to the geopolitical conflicts. Some ruling government will even revive the anti-communist boogeyman, bringing back the Red Scare to justify their repressive measure against a social movement. Okay, of course, this is not something unfamiliar for the left in the Southeast Asian region, okay, with what happened in Indonesia in the 1960s during the height of the Cold War. So the rise of China's becoming the major player in global arena has challenged the US imperialist, imperialist US hegemony. China has become a counterbalancing force to US imperialism. This brings us a shift from the unipolar world after the fall of Berlin Wall in the last 3 decades into a new multipolar or at least bipolar world order. The emergence of a multipolar world with China become more and more prominent at the world stage will allow developing countries to have more options, spaces, and flexibilities to negotiate deals with major powers in international affairs or economic cooperation. But this is only possible if these countries, if these developing countries are able to stay non-aligned with any of the superpowers. And okay, so this is some of the positive side of the so-called multipolar world. But the downside is the repressive regimes will have alternative lifelines if they are not getting support from the US imperialism, like those in Turkey and Pakistan. Okay, if US withdrawing the support, they can find an option, China, to support their repressive regimes. So how should the left respond? Okay, or position ourselves in the situation of escalation, geopolitical conflicts, and US-China rivalry. Okay, of course, first of all, we must call for the escalation of geopolitical conflicts and oppose any form of war, whether Cold War or hot war. We must rally the anti-war movement to oppose the US to oppose any attempt of US preemptive strike on China. On the question of Taiwan, we should call on China.
Sorry, 2 minutes.
Okay, right. Yeah, I'm going to conclude. On the question of Taiwan, we should call on China to at least refrain from resorting to military action in its drive to achieve so-called reunification, and Beijing should respect the right of Taiwanese people to decide their future. This is the litmus test for the left in China and elsewhere, regardless they are for unification of China or not, to recognize the right to self-determination of the Taiwanese people, okay? And then only possible to talk about the future of Taiwan. Otherwise, we will degenerate into apologists or cheerleader for nationalist chauvinist war machines. We must work for the demilitarization of South China Sea and Asia Pacific region. One of the keys to demilitarization of this region is shutting down all US military bases in the region. We must call for a stop of suicidal arms races among major powers in the world. The governments in the region should foster a genuine regional cooperation based on solidarity. In the midst of heightening inter-superpower rivalry, it is time for us to revive the Bandung spirit for peaceful coexistence in the 21st century, but with a tweak of emphasizing on working class solidarity from below, rather than only rely on government-to-government cooperation. We on the left should be anti-imperialist. And of course, anti-imperialism is a class struggle, and it should be a movement from below, not relying on competition among states or war between states. Therefore, it is imperative for us to rebuild solidarity among the working class movement beyond national borders. Okay, lastly, before I end my presentation, I just want to share a quote. This is also a reminder to us and to the Communist Party of China by quoting what Deng Xiaoping said in 1974 during the special session of United Nations General Assembly. There was the time they're discussing the new international economic order, which never materialized because of the neoliberal globalization, as we know. Okay, this is what Deng Xiaoping said then. Okay. He said, China is not a superpower, nor will she seek to be one. What is superpower? A superpower is an imperialist country which everywhere subjects other countries to its aggression, interference, control, subversion, or plunder, and strives for world hegemony. If capitalism is restored in a big socialist country, it will inevitably become a superpower. Okay, the omitted part, actually, basically, he's saying that the Cultural Revolution stopped the restoration of capitalism. Okay, I'm not going for that. Okay, if one day, China should change her color and turn into a superpower, if she too should play the tyrant in the world and everywhere subject others to her believing, aggression and exploitation, the people of the world should identify her as social imperialism, expose it, oppose it, and work together with the Chinese people to overthrow it. Okay, with this, I end my presentation. Back to you, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Chungkai. Comrade Chungkai started a very interesting point. The debate between China is not only about the debate between China versus US is not only about the good versus the bad, not only about the capital socialist. It's more complex than that. And yeah, Comrade Chungkai explained a lot. So now it's time for Comrade Rido. Thanks, Comrade Rido, please.
Yeah, thank you, Comrade Abu, for the introduction, and thanks a lot for the committee to invite me to have to speaking in here. Yeah, probably I will try to provide different perspective about how we should understand China in here, because as Comrade Chunka and also Comrade Rusty has already pointed out, the position of China in current capitalism is quite, let's say, complex, right? Because it is intertwined with the development of what we call as a global capitalism itself, in which the US play integral role in here. So for my time in here, I probably will try to focus with more on how we understand the relationship between China, contemporary capitalism, China, and how we should understand the main theme in here about the South China Sea dispute. I will try to present my work in here. So how to share? Oh wait, Comrade Abu, can you help me to enable me to share my presentation here? Oh. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, yes.
Wait. I need to be more. Okay. Okay, sure. Yeah. So as I will try. Probably Chunkai and Comrade Chunkai and Rasta has already touched upon some ideas that I will try to explain in here. So it is quite important because the relationship between contemporary imperialism and China seems underdeveloped in our political conversation as Southeast Asian left and Southeast Asia and Australian left. So that's why I will try to provide not necessarily new, but different perspective about how we should understand imperialism, contemporary imperialism, which led by the US, and how it relates to China, which basically I argue that there's a certain dynamic that we need to take into account. So I argue that in its initial development, it can be said that when China decided to integrate their economy to the what we call as a global capitalism, due to what we saw as a neoliberal counter-revolution, China can be considered as a subordinate to US power. However, there are some things that makes this relationship seems develop into more different direction, and so that's why these things create some of divergence of interest between the US and China itself, and which I argue this framework is useful about how left should Southeast Asian left should assess South China Sea dispute right now. Yeah, so like I said before, we need to put matter into context, right? So what I call this context as a contemporary imperialism, which basically some sort of you can call it as a neocolonialism, neo-imperialism, whatever. But I would try to argue that there's some specific development in imperialism in which not the change of mode of production, but the change about how the capitalism itself managed by the capitalist state. So we all agree that in the 70s and the 80s, all of the major capitalist country has experienced transformation, in which we all know as a neoliberal counter-revolution, which basically they try to create an integrated global capitalist market, which not only obsessed to prevent the influence and power of the Soviet Union at that time, but also try to restructure, retransform, refounded their what they believe as a advancement of capitalist interest, or what Harvey says as a restoration of class project, in which basically they create this kind of system in which all of countries that they want to develop under the logic of capitalism have to follow certain strict rules like economic liberalization, deregulation, and financialization, which basically happens to everyone when they experience a major capitalist crisis in the 80s, like in Africa, Latin America, even in Southeast Asia. And it basically changing the relation between the state and the citizen, and so that's why under this period we saw an increase of income inequality within and between countries, particularly between the the global north and global south. And what is interesting in here is this transformation is followed with the strengthening of the role of the U.S. as the leader of as the chief of the system itself, in which they responsible to maintain the stability of the system itself, in which in our case can be seen about how they control the international financial institution like the World Bank or the IMF, and they play a crucial role in the military practice, like how they control NATO and other security agreement. So basically, I would try to argue that contrary capitalism is a neoliberal plus the coercive role of the US here. And what's also important in here is there's a specificity that we also need to address in here, particularly about how when the US promote these kind of things, China decide to become part of this new role of game. Yeah, you can say that this relate to the context of a Sino-Soviet conflict, in which the Chinese under Mao accused the Soviet becomes revisionist after the death of Stalin, in which they saw that the Soviet no longer can be considered as a socialist country, and that's why they saw that the major antagonist of the global order is no longer what we know as a US imperialism, but become the Soviet entity. And this kind of things, and I think Comrade Chunkan has already explained briefly about how the US, how the Chinese, due to this conflict, decide to align themselves with the US, and also, and we also need to consider the internal factor in here, in which the Mao initiative to launch cultural revolution campaign seems failed to deliver its promise to create a more radical society, more just society. But then it just didn't happen, and it creates some sort of trauma among the communists, particularly those who ruled the state at the time under the Communist Party of China, in which they saw that we need to, let's say, come back to their roots as a Marxist. They believe that the most important thing to do is right now is to develop what they call as a productive force, in which they argue that it's already in the canon of Marxism itself. So that's why they decide, and the thing to advance this productive force is to, yeah, you can say that implicitly they believe that the capitalist kind of thinks that this is the only rule of the game at that time. So that's why liberalization at the 1978 becomes important for their Chinese economic development. Yeah, so that's why in here, we need to see the relationship between the US and the Chinese at the time. It's an unequal relationship. I mean, because basically when the Chinese decide to integrate themselves to the US rule of order, they basically sacrifice themselves because they have to provide their population as a cheap labor for US economy, and also they basically become fully compliant to the rule of US-led economic order. And yeah, previously, like Comrade Rusty and Chunka has already mentioned about how they become a member of WTO in 2001, and also China's during its initial development, when they experience trade surplus, their reserve becomes important to absorb the bond that comes from the US, in order to ensure that US population still have money to consume Chinese product. And so basically, within this relationship, you can say that it's impossible for the Chinese to seek for global hegemony, since their development entirely dependent to the existing rule of economic order that led by the US. And in terms of this kind of Chinese development, we also need to be more meticulous. I mean, there's some certain development that we need to emphasize in here, and these differences is important because it explains the uniqueness of Chinese experience. So unlike other countries, when they decide to do liberalization, the Chinese liberalization still put the state as important actor in the economy. Yeah, like I said before, it's because due to their belief about the developing of productive force, and because of this characteristic, the bourgeoisie, in which they allow to thrive in the economy, still don't have power to influence the state. The only power that capable to control the state is still the Communist Party of China, or the CPC. So that's why these things make, for me, it's important characteristic, and makes their claim about socialism with Chinese characteristic seems logical, because the state control, you can say that is the eternal legacy of the Chinese state itself, in which already part of their roots as a socialist country. So you can say that there's a mix between capitalism and socialism in here. And the things is, while they allow capitalism to thrive, but many surplus from that capitalist development is being tamed by the Communist Party, and then used to develop the public infrastructure of the state itself. So you can say that in these things, I argue that, yeah, this is socialism. But I agree with their opinion that China is a socialist with their own characteristic. So in this matter, I also agree that it's hard to consider China as an imperialist, because when we understand imperialism in terms of Lenin's view, Lenin's always say that imperialism has 5 distinctive characteristics, right? But I think the most important thing is the class formation of the state itself, which basically, in the case of China, you cannot say that the state is the monopoly capitalist, because, yeah, although they have this this interest for accumulation for the growth, but this interest is not the same like the monopoly capitalist, in which for the monopoly capitalist is a accumulation for the accumulation's sake, but they believe that accumulation needs to be promoted in order to gain surplus, and then the surplus is being used to develop the whole project of the state as a public institution. So that's why I view that China is not an imperialist, albeit when they try to interact to other countries, they, due to of their internal integration with the capitalist order, there's some aspect of capitalism in their interaction. So that's why we can still feel some sort of ambiguity in here. So in terms of interaction with other country, they still follow non-interference principle, in which basically they just don't care about or don't want to know about the internal dynamic of a certain country, as long as that those government in the country agree with the economic principle that being put in the table by the Chinese. And also, unlike imperialist power, there's no political attachment in the economic relationship, in economic cooperation. And so that's why I'm kind of skeptical to any argument that China create a debt trap relationship with those who consider as a less developed country. And also I just see that the relationship between the Chinese and the other less developed country tends to be fragmented, no systematic approach, because because they just feel that its economy has to be grounded to the economic actor itself. So that's why they only provide framework, but no comprehensive project that needs to be followed. It all depends to the situation in the field itself, whether the economic actor in China and other country can be made in certain agreement. And the main thing for their economic cooperation is only trade. And also this cooperation is more likely to create external market for the China, the main interest, because the China saw the importance of external market to absorb into China's industrial output. So they just unlike the US or other Western capitalist country, they don't force the so-called less developed partner. And wait. Oh man, I made a mistake in the stage. Okay, so within these things, I argue that the divergence between the US and the Chinese emerged in the context of the global capitalism itself, when 2007, 2008 global financial crisis erupt. It can be said that the crisis leads to the decline of the US as a global capitalist power, and this event then you can say enable the US to be more increasingly active in promoting proxy war in order to appropriate resources in other places, while at the same time, due to the Chinese rapid development, Chinese saw different approach about how to maintain their economy. As I said before, Chinese economy is rooted in a ordinary capitalist order, but then they saw that the chief itself is in trouble, and the capitalist order is no longer normal for them. So that's why they have to create their own game. So that's why it's better to them to reach other country and make their own agreements. So in here, you can say that there's a divergent interest between the US and the Chinese, and this become the very foundation of the escalation conflict between the US and China. So you can say that the relationship in here is a relationship between the US as an old imperialist power with the China that tried to be more proactive in a global economic order in the context of the capitalism, in the context of the crisis of capitalism itself, in which unable to be recovered up until now. So when we saw this this framework, we can see that one thing, that China is not imperialist, but how then we can understand the South China Sea dispute when many our comrades here saw how China is so assertive to claim their right in the region. One thing for sure, that the claim of China towards the South China Sea based on historical surveying expedition, and interestingly, they already engaged to this sea even before their decision to become a capitalist power. So in 1974, Mao Zedong decided to maneuver into the chain of islands in South China Sea, in which basically has nothing to do with their interest as a capitalist power, but it has to do with the context of Sino-Soviet conflict. So you can say that Sino-Soviet conflict plays quite important role in defining or understanding the China's development in here. So you can, the reason for their involvement in the South China Sea after the 90s is definitely about the economic resource. You can say that South China Sea, they have plenty of oil and gas resource, and also considered as a fisheries many fisheries activity takes place also in the South China Sea. So that's why. Sorry, some living Thailand.
Sorry, can you mute? Who's that? Can someone mute?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, the reason is quite pragmatic in it. It's all about economic resource in the South China Sea, and also the assertiveness, the perception of assertiveness also related to the prevailing sentiments among the Southeast Asian country that consider China as a regional threat. And here, I think, due to their assertiveness and also increased perception of threat, it provides the opportunity for the US and its regional allies like India and Japan to interfere.
Marido, 2 minutes. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. This is only the last. So they see that US can be important counterweight to China, and that's why the US try to assert their influence, not only to back the Southeast Asian country, but also try to challenge China's influence in the region. But I saw that this kind of things, and also definitely China unfortunately decide to take a more stronger stance after 2010 in here. but I saw that their assertiveness is a dead end for China's long project for economic cooperation in the region, because they have other initiative that needs to be more persuasive to other Southeast Asia country, like the Belt and Road Initiative. So I saw that there's a dilemma on China in here, and definitely their assertiveness won't answer this dilemma, but more persuasion, more cooperation, and more understanding among actors in the between the Chinese and the South Asian country will be the key in here. And I saw there some prospect for this, because yeah, China is not imperialist country. Yeah, that's all, Comrade Abu. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, I have to
Yes.
stop share, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Comrade Rido. Comrade Rido, I have a very interesting point. Is China capitalist or socialist? Comrade Rido argues China is not an imperialist power, absorbs certain aspect of capitalism, and argument is supported by the sub-argument. Other country follow non-interference principle. I mean, China economic investment toward other country follow non-interference principle, and no political attachment, economic cooperation, and trade is the main aim, and more likely to create external market to absorb China industrial output. Of course, we can have a discussion on this argument. We can agree or disagree with this. We can have a debate on this. So we already have a lot of question here in the question and answer box. Please, for the participant, if you have question, please post in the question and answer box, not in the chat. It's difficult for me to trace if you put in the chat box. Okay. So and I have a permission from the organizer to extend the time for answer, because a lot of question here. So we will have around 45 minutes for the question and answer. I think the first question is Comrade Rusty. Why do you use the term KGB line and not CIA or MI5 line? So that is the first question for Rusty. And the next question is, I think this next question is for all speaker. Isn't China of state-controlled enterprise to establish enough productive capacity to establish a solid socialist? Without this, how would a socialist nation satisfy the need of the people enough to battle against global capitalist propaganda? This is from anonymous attendee. And the next question is from Kumar. Outsourcing of manufacturing from EU and US to China has led to the undermining of the labor movement in the West, as the union weakened by loss of industrial jobs that have political in this country to the right, with ongoing cutback to the welfare system and rising xenophobia. Is there some awareness in Chinese leadership that their economic rise is undermining Western prosperity? So that is the third question, or the second question, speaker. I think a lot of questions here, so we can start with this three questions first. So all of you, not more than 5 minutes, because we have to go to another question. Thank you. Yes. If my explanation clear enough, you can just read in the Q&A box. So please, Comrade Rusty first. Please unmute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, basically, you could say that I really want to piss off US imperialism and piss off US foreign policy strategic planners by using the KGB analogy. But at the same time, while pissing them off, it clearly shows objectively and substantially that the three strategic concepts that were actually identified, advocated, and to a certain degree executed by those three national security advisors continue to be fused, synthesized, and synergized in the current Biden regime's foreign policy framework, which he personally outlined twice in February and then again in March of this year, and is now being employed, if not deployed, through the AUKUS, Australia, United Kingdom, United States Trilateral Security Collective Pact today. Again, the Kissinger-Gray-Brzezinski line, KGB, has a strong basis in the past geostrategic concepts and conceptualizations of the US foreign policy and national security apparatus since the 1950s and even in the late 1940s. Again, I'll assert that Kissinger says that the world, in his view, is an anarchic place to live in, and the US imperialism must always protect and advance its core strategic interests in world affairs. And the only way to do that is through US-led alliances. Now, Gordon Gray, said that psychological strategy should be the operational basis to further advance all the interests of US imperialism on the world stage, which means all dirty tactics short of open war. And that is what many now call political warfare, and others call it gray zone tactics. As I identified in my paper, I was not able to, well, I think I was able to mention a range of this, but that is exactly what the US has been doing. And that's why you see over 100 forms of US imperialist interventions around the world since the 1890s, essentially. And then Brzezinski says that for the US to maintain its global predominance in world affairs, the US has to basically look at the globe today and the world map. If you look at the world map for geostrategic thinkers, it's essentially divided into the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere. Of course, there is the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern, but that includes only the Arctic and Antarctica. In the Eastern Hemisphere, however, which is outlined in my paper, 80% of the world's populace live here. More than 160 states or countries out of the world's 196 countries are physically, geographically located here. And this part of the world includes the Eurasian heartland. And if you look at the world map closely in terms of the Eastern Hemisphere, the Eurasian heartland will show that it starts on the western edge of the North Atlantic with the British Isles, and it ends on the opposite side in the Japanese archipelagic islands in the Pacific Ocean. And in between this Eurasian heartland lies the world's largest state or country land-wise, and this is Russia. And next to it is China. And that's the reason why the Chinese, the Communist Party of China and the Putin regime have decided to come up with their own strategic partnership, which was put in place as early as 2001. Now, they do recognize, the Chinese and the Russians recognize that he control this part of the world, essentially controls more than 2/3 of the global space. And that means the international order today. And in this context, this is exactly what Brzezinski was saying all along. But of course, he no longer is in power, but his ideas are now being adopted and operationalized in combination with Kissinger's and Gray's. That's why I say that there is a fusion, a synthesis, and a synergy of the three concepts into what you can now analogize as the KGB. Again, Kissinger, Gray, Brzezinski foreign policy line of US imperialism.
Second and third question, can you respond to that?
Again, I forgot the
yeah.
second. What is that? Sorry.
The second question is, isn't China model of state control enterprise to establish enough productive capacity to establish a solid socialist state? Without this, how would a socialist nation provide the need of the people enough to battle against global capitalist propaganda? So can you answer to that question or respond to it? Yeah.
Okay. I could be wrong in my understanding of the question, but the way I understood it is that China definitely has to continue to pursue a socialist project. There is no question about it. The international working class movement wants socialism to be developed and advanced worldwide. However, China today is not like the China from 1949 until, let's say, the interregnum period between the Cultural Revolutionary era from 1966 to 76, which disrupted the socialist development. If I can recall, it was identified by Chairman Mao at the time as an initial early first phase of China's advancement towards socialism. With his death in 76, this was not only totally disrupted, but, well, totally disrupted in the sense that a new leadership under the Hua Guofeng, Deng Xiaoping joint leadership at the time until 1978 were able to wrest control and inside the party and shift the party's line along a capitalist road. And since then, and Comrade Chong Kai said this himself, from 78 to 82, when Chairman Deng was able to consolidate and marginalize the Hua Guofeng at the time, until the Southern Tour of 1992, the key elements of capitalism were brought into the picture, so to speak. And concretely, the basis for the production relations character of China's capitalist socio-economic formation were further ingrained, concretized, and deepened to the point that by 1992 onward until today, you now have the China's economic structure and framework essentially geared toward a capitalist mode of production. And this essentially is how I view China today. It's basically controlled still by the Communist Party of China, and therefore it has still a dominant state leverage or control over this capitalist system, and therefore you may call it a state capitalist model. It's definitely mixed. I think one comrade, if it was not Comrade Rito, mentioned it, but this mixed economic framework is definitely in favor of the capitalist mode, and therefore the Communist Party of China's leadership is consciously and clearly developing this line of march, if you may, in order to use China's concrete developmental and economic gains to align with its achievements by 2049 and 2050 of a great socialist power for China. This was identified in the 2017 or proposed in the resolutions of the Communist Party of China's National Congress in 2017, and therefore geared toward that thrust until 2049, 2050. China needs to continue developing its capitalist entity and basis. Now, yes.
Yes, can you? Are you? Yeah, because we have more questions. Can you answer shortly? Yeah.
Okay. Well, what is the third question now?
Yes, please. Yes.
You're asking me about the third question?
Yes, but please answer very shortly because more and more question is coming.
Okay. Well, that's the way I understand, and
Yeah.
that is the way I view China today. It's
Yes, thank
essentially state capitalist. The production relations of its socioeconomic formation shows it. If you gear it toward a Marxist and even Leninist standpoint, and therefore China must also be viewed in terms of the context it's developing itself toward. And that's the reason why the US imperialists are not very happy with what happened to China after the global capitalist crash or crises of September 15, 2008, the crash of Wall Street. And that is the reason why I posit earlier in my paper, there is an US imperialist rebalance, which is effectively an offensive and an onslaught against China through a new geostrategy, which I call the hemispheric arc of denial, which is essentially what Comrade Chiang Kai showed in his global map. It's an arc from the western zone of periphery of China all the way to its eastern. It's basically surrounded by US imperialist allies and military bases, including here in the Philippines. The US has 5 military bases. So in this context, that is the reason why the US wants to ensure that China remains in a semi-peripheral, in the semi-peripheral zone of the imperialist world system today, in order for Washington to maintain its global hegemonic predominance in world affairs.
Thank you, Comrade Rusty. So yeah, thank you for your answer. So now it's for Chiang Kai. Can you answer please the second and third question? Yes, Chiang Kai, please.
Answer to the second
5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, just quick answer. Because I think the most of the state socialists in the past, and including China, are taking the doctrine of productive forces determinism as their development strategy, which there's a need to develop the productive force by generating surpluses from some accumulation process, especially the primitive accumulation. But how to generate such surplus? Okay, whether you use the way that opening up the economy to the private capitalists from the developed countries to move in, or the state doing that. Okay, so these are the challenges: how to generate surplus through the accumulation in order to develop the productive capacity of the national economy. Okay, and of course the question is how to generate the surplus and how to distribute and use the surplus for the accordingly. So this actually generates few challenges for such states, whether it's a socialist state or you have a socialist doing a market socialist or whatever. The problem one is whether there is a check and balance of or how the workers or the working class participate in this process. Is there any workers' democracy or academic democracy to decide how to distribute the surplus? Because when we're talking about generating surplus to the accumulation process, it definitely will involve some form of displacement or squeezing out from some of the section of the society. So how you decide it? So this is I think the challenges, one of the tough challenges faced by such economies. And of course, also how to check the people in power who control such entities, whether it's a state, fully state control or state-owned companies, or you allow the private capitalists come in and you have the regulation. So those people having the power holding the regulation, who check on these people? So if you don't have enough worker democracies, so you have corruptions like China's, when they're opening up a lot of issue of corruption, then you have to start another anti-corruption campaign, whatever, to fight it. And whether it's successful or not is another question. But these are the things that can happen. But anyway, these are one of the approach taken by most of the state socialists, as well as the socialist states who are opening up for market. So these are the challenges. Okay, actually, I wanted to address, I just saw one question from related to question with Kumar on the third world countries. So like the third world countries, whether you're socialist or not, to develop your economy, you need investment, you need to build up your productive capacity. So for me, just now I shared about in the case of emerging multipolar world situation, actually, well, the developing countries should use this as an advantage to negotiate a better deal with
Comrade, please speak slower because the interpretation is
to negotiate for the better deal in the investment. Okay, to protect the interests of the working class lah. If you're socialist, definitely you can negotiate back. Of course, you cannot do it alone, because you were bullied also still by the big powers. So you need to do it as a bloc, working to a regional corporations, like the Southeast Asian countries. You have the ASEAN, whether ASEAN can negotiate as a bloc, that on the behalf of the interest of the working class. So this is can be done. And because you have a kind of a multipolar situation, so you can walk away from any negotiation, whether with US or China, okay, as a threat to them, to submit to the demand on behalf of the workers of the working class. So this is just my view. Yeah, maybe Rido want to.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Comrade. Now is Rido.
Yeah, Emma. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with Comrade who asked this question. But I need to. We need. And in this case, I kind of sympathetic to the Chinese in here. I mean, they try everything in order to promote their economic development right from 1949 until you can say that they start to create the commune, and also they try to create what we know as the Iron Ball policy, and even they try to encourage cultural revolution. And you can say that all of these things initiative kind of fail in their particular definition, definitely. But when they try to create the so-called market socialism, yeah, you can say we can all agree that this kind of things is successful for the Chinese itself. So that's why I kind of sympathetic to their experience in here, because I just saw that every time we socialists try to establish socialism, we definitely don't have any manual, only kind of trial and error experiment. And I think in this case, I still think that China, the Communist Party of China, is kind of honest about their effort to establish socialism. The key things, the critical things for us, particularly for the socialists in the Southeast Asia, definitely about how they do it, right? They as I mentioned before, they kind of mix their economic system, right? In terms of labor process, there's no difference between labor process in China and other capitalist country. So that's why we still find exploitation, long working hours, and let's say the reduction of labor rights. But in a more macro level, in terms of political decision, you can say that the surplus that coming from this kind of capitalist labor process is not used for the interest of the capitalists. It's all used to create what we know as a public state infrastructure. So yeah, you can say that in terms of the labor process, we can always be critical with the Chinese, but the orientation for socialist construction and development is still there. And for me, in order for us to change this course, it's not about the Chinese. It's all about our whole international socialist movement itself. I have a hypothesis that in order to change that kind of things, we need to change the whole situation of the global order itself. We need to ensure that more socialists taking power in all developing countries, all developed countries, in order to can have more pressure for the China, not pressure, but more like suggestion for the Chinese that yeah, there's an alternative in terms of labor process that also can deliver economic growth, that can also environment sustainability, aside that kind of labor process. So it's a kind of complicated things, and I still agree with Comrade in here that in terms of labor process, Chinese is definitely quite problematic. But I still believe that they are not losing sight about their orientation towards socialist construction. Yeah.
Thank you, Muhammad, Comrade Rido. Because we have a lot of questions here, I think I have to choose only some question because our limited time. So apologize for the participant who cannot respond here. It is only because of the limited time that I have to choose only. The first question is for, I only can choose 3 questions in this second question and answer session, right? I'm sorry for that. The first question is for Chon Kai from Tai Yuki. Chinese dream for the great revival of the Chinese nation, as suggested by Xi Jinping, was meant to create a nationalist approach from the ideology of Marxism or international socialism. Yes, please, Comrade Chon Kai. So that is for Comrade. So the second question is, I think, for the all panelists from Maharani, Russia. Maharani, Russia. To all panelists, one of the biggest problem facing third world countries trying to grow their economy by industrializing is the lack of capital. If you try and accumulate from the national economy alone, you will need to squeeze the peasant who are already poor. So is China and Vietnam approach to leverage foreign capital and technology a reasonable development for poor formerly colonized country of Asia and Africa? The question is, I repeat again. So is China and Vietnam approach to leverage foreign technology is a reasonable development strategy for poor formerly colonized countries of Africa? This question is from Kumar for the all. And the third question is, I don't know how to choose. Okay, about the Taiwan issue from the anonymous attendee. Insofar as Taiwan is concerned, can we say Taiwan is now a liberated nation from Western imperialist power when Taiwan has historically been used to undermine China's imperialist power in the first place? How likely is it that China will invade Taiwan? And is it a possibility that certain fascist movement or thug be spread in Taiwan to force to invade? So that's third question also for all panelists. So for the Chon Kai, so please Chon Kai, yeah.
Just quick answer. I think Yuki answer whether it was Marxism, socialism. Actually, I just a simple answer from the Chinese authority is what socialism or whatever with Chinese characteristic. That's the but of course how you define it, I think we can have, put different framework to discuss it. On the question of Taiwan, okay, of course Taiwan now at the moment actually is a de facto independent countries, okay, with limited recognition, of course not recognized at all by Beijing, and it's always been used by the West as something that to to contain China, and the Taiwanese governments has chosen. Actually, they're also forced because they are like they was in war they were in war with China. Then they need to get an ally, so they become the allies with US lah. So this is the kind of the relationship of Taiwan with US. Okay, but as I said earlier in the presentation, that US are taking the approach of a strategic ambiguity when they formal relationship with China. So whether the China will invade Taiwan or not, as I say, for any Chinese leaders in Beijing which have rational thinking, they won't go on war because of Taiwan. But of course, they say because Taiwan is one of the important part of the nationalist project of reunification. Okay, they won't allow Taiwan to. Okay, the red line drawn by Beijing. Okay, the red line might change. Okay, one of the, I think the basic red line is Taiwan declared independent. As I said, it's de facto independent state. But if Taiwan declared independent, for example, change the name from the Republic of China into Taiwan Republic, something like that, become a de jure independent state. Okay, China might use that as a reason to launch a war. Okay. But the thing is, this is just a change of name. No? So whether China will risk the confrontation with US or not to war? Because even that before that, China also claiming that if US built a military base in Taiwan, they will start a war. Okay, and then recently there's a revelation that there were US military advisors in Taiwan and then enriched Beijing, but they didn't go for war because of that. Okay. So these are the red line, how China draw the red line, and whether they are prepared to confront. Because if event go on war, it will definitely damage the Chinese ambition for their so-called the great rejuvenation of Chinese nation, and also the well-preserved political stability at the moment. Because I say, I think the red line for the Chinese Communist Party is the preservation of the rule of the Communist Party. That's the red line of the. As long as you cannot guarantee the preservation of the rule of the maybe the eternal rule of the Communist Party, they won't go for war. That's my view.
Thank you. Now, please for Comrade Rido. Unmute.
Yeah. Okay. For the Taiwan's question, in this case, I think the Chinese government they don't have any plan to invade Taiwan, because in terms of the population itself, you can say that many Taiwanese consider themselves as part of the mainland. So I just thought that, and as Comrade Chunka has already explained about the possibility of that the China's invasion towards Taiwan will destroy the performance of the Chinese government itself. So I just thought that it will be hard for them to decide for invading Taiwan, unless the U.S. provocation. We have to consider the U.S. provocation in here. So for us, the left, we need to ensure that whatever the resolution between the Taiwan's government and the Chinese, we have to ensure that no interference from the U.S., because the U.S. is the main culprit in here. So that's my first position. And the second question is regarding to the Maharani Russia question, right? If I'm not mistaken, about
Yes.
Oh yeah, China's yeah. I definitely agree with Comrade Russia in here, because I believe that we need to be not opportunistic, but more pragmatic about how we should develop our country, that being the victim of the imperialist power in here, in which we all of us unable to advance our, if we use the China's, our productive force, right? And I think that the China and Vietnam in here becomes the important leverage for us to develop our productive force. So yes, I definitely agree with Comrade Russia, although we need to be more cautious about how we should cooperate with the Chinas and the Vietnam, particularly the Chinese. I just saw that the Chinese engagement with the less developed country is because of their non-interference principle. They just don't care about the whole internal dynamic, internal power constellation. So we just have to ensure that in order to this leverage can also beneficial for the working class, for the lower classes, we have to ensure that we as the left is the ruling class, becoming the ruling class, because as what happened in Latin America, like in Bolivia and also in Venezuela and in some cases Ecuador under Rafael Correa, all of them benefited from their interaction with the Chinese, and also the union itself also benefited from the Chinese, because the government create a strong parameter that ensure that cooperation between their state, between their country and China has also protect the rights of their worker. So yeah, I think that that's a good leverage that we need to be that we need to use, but still we have to ensure that we are the ruling class in the state. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, now is for Comrade Rusty. Comrade Rusty, please answer your question shortly, because we will have the next session in 10 minutes after this. So not more than 5 minutes, okay, Comrade?
Okay.
Because we will have another session after this. Thank you.
Okay. With regard to the first question regarding the national development paths of the mainly global South countries or developing countries, since many of them are not socialist at this point, it would be positive for them to develop their own independent so-called pathways, if you may. And that would include, for example, many of them have foreign debts. To unilaterally call out for a cancellation of their foreign debts and to convert or redirect such funds for an internal development with a reindustrialization or a reoriented industrialization mode for them to further develop their economic basis. Secondly, with regard to Vietnam and China, the way I understand it, it would be, or even any other powerful state like the U.S. Itself, these countries must be able to develop and maintain a strongly independent and internationalist foreign policy that will engage these states if they want to help these developing countries move forward, but on the basis of the national developmental goals identified by the internal society or the peoples of these independent developing states, and not to be imposed or controlled or dictated upon by outside forces such as the IMF, World Bank, WTO, or others. At the same time, perhaps a wealth tax. I know maybe in some countries or many countries may not have enough internal wealth to be really redistributed, but those countries that have the capacity, a wealth tax must be imposed. Also, those foreign direct investment schemes must be dictated upon and under the control of the state itself, in order to ensure that any development objectives are met with the corresponding external funded externally funded schemes, if you may. So this is a combination, including, let's say, if this international socialist forces can put forward a global call for some kind of a unified global fund to redirect excess funds from the multilateral financial institutions to be used effectively for the development of the developing countries in order to raise their level of economic capacity beyond just remaining in the peripheral zone of the capitalist or imperialist world system, so that they can also be at par and be independently industrialized at the same time and not be used by imperialist interests. So those are just some of my initial thoughts and comments. With regard to
sorry,
China,
1 minute.
yes.
Yes,
With
please.
regard to Taiwan, okay.
1 minute.
Yes. Well, definitely we don't want any war. I agree with the two comrades, Rido and Chongkai. U.S. imperialism or any other outside force must not, especially the Americans, meddle in this area of the world, not just Taiwan, but in what I call the Southeast Asian Sea. And that is why we must call this part of this body of water the Southeast Asian Sea and not just the South China Sea or whatever. The idea here is to allow both the Communist Party of China and the various ruling political factions on Taiwan as an entity to continue to develop an internal peace process forward, devoid of war. Of course, China, there may be sections in the Communist Party of China saying that the National Democratic Revolution with the founding of the PRC in October of 1949 will not be finished until the NDR is completed with Taiwan reunified under the People's Republic
Comrade,
of China.
Time's up. Sorry.
Okay, well,
Yes.
those are my initial points. Thank you very much, comrades.
Yes, thank you, Comrade Rusty, and I apologize because I have to. The organizer keep remind me we have to end this session because we will the next session about the Rojava revolution. So please, participant and panelists here, please join the next session at 12:30 p.m. Kuala Lumpur time. The next session will be about Rojava revolution. Oh yeah, thank you for all speaker and all participants here. I'm really sorry because I cannot accommodate all the question here. It's only because of the limited time. That's the only reason. There is no more another reason. We have a different perspective, different opinion, different analysis, but we have more reason to work together closely to monitor both the US expansion or Chinese capital expansion that will harm the people and create injustice and accumulate the profit from everywhere. So yes, thank you again, and sorry to the all if I keep asking you to stop. Yes, sorry again. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.